Good evening and welcome to Community Camera, a special GATV production featuring people of interest from our community. Tonight we join Isabel Gillispie as she interviews Irene Toth about her years as postmaster of the Gladstone Post Office.
Irene Toth is both wife and mother, and she has lived in the Gladstone area for approximately 40 years, so I'm sure many people know her. How about starting by telling us when your postal career started, and do a little reminiscing, Irene?
I began my postal career May the 1st, 1960, when my husband Lloyd and I bought the Mayfell store. The first day I dispatched mail, I'll never forget. I was all thumbs and everything went wrong. I was near tears before I had the first bag locked. But anyway, it seems funny now to think of that because Mayfeld only served 35 to 40 families as compared to Gladstone. So it's kind of funny to have been so scared. Mind you, there wasn't anybody around to help you or look over your shoulder, tell you when things were going wrong. You just sort of muddle through. And Mr. Mackenzie was my supervisor, and he came out once a year and audited the books. But when we first started, Lloyd was the carrier and mail contract carrier, and he took the mail between Mayfeld and Gladstone. And the contract was up in about a year or two. I don't really remember for sure how long that contract was. But then the next mail contract, they were going to have it between Mayfeld, Helston, and Gladstone. So they felt the contractor should be living at either end of the run. So they gave the next contract to Harry Mayers. And Mrs. Mayers always came with them, and we enjoyed many a joke together when they came on their run 3 times a week. The next 10 years flew by pretty quickly. We were raising our family and things were pretty routine. But
can you tell us when the rural post offices were closed?
Well, that's when things kind of started to change. In 1970, the Post Office Department decided to close Mayfeld, Helston, and Muir post offices. So they made a rural route, and it was emanating out of Gladstone. And our rural route carriers were, the first one was Steve Lazure, and then Foch Willis, and our last carrier was Harvey Rain.
How come you applied for the postal job in Gladstone, Irene? Had you been talking to someone that gave you an interest in being involved?
Well, no. With the promotion of John Dewar to postmaster at Gillam, a position came open for a part-time assistant. And I applied for the job, and I was lucky enough to be awarded it. I started work in Gladstone March the 1st, but I still was postmaster at Mayfeld. And because the post office wouldn't be closed for 2 months. Like that would be May the 1st that they were closing it. The Post Office Department decided that I couldn't hold down 2 jobs, so they made Lloyd the temporary postmaster until the closing date. And one thing for sure, on the forms where it said postmaster's signature, Lloyd just really signed them with a flourish. But I don't remember him ever doing one thing with the figures or balances, and I'm not sure the department was right that I couldn't hold down 2 jobs.
Who was postmaster at this time in Gladstone then?
Mr. Leonard was the postmaster in Gladstone, and Painter Graham was the assistant too, and Lil Brooks and I were the part-time assistants. Lil worked the morning shift, and I worked the afternoon shift, and we each worked 19 hours a week.
How about giving some information on your work for the next few years then?
Well, I had 10 years in postal dispatching, receiving, accounting, money orders, but I had no experience in post office boxes, foreign money orders, and absolutely no knowledge at all of international dispatching, international parcels for dispatching. So, but however, things were much easier because Mr. Leonard and painter were really terrific in training you. They were always there. They showed you when you went wrong, and it was really great.
What was your next promotion?
In 1972, Painter Graham was promoted to Minnedosa, and his job came open. There were 14 of us wrote the civil service exam, and we wrote it at the school. The school principal was the conductor of it, and I was lucky enough to get the promotion. I was now fully trained, and as assistant it became my job to train the new employees, and I trained about 16 staff members over the years.
Can you remember the name of all the employees that you trained?
Verna Otto was the first, and followed quickly by Christine Whiteman, Florence Wilson, and Phyllis Park. We also had Kathy Breitkreitz, and Lorraine Burt, Ann Dell, and Elliette. Next came Edith Foster, Sharon Merkin, Audrey Clayton, and Barb Stefiak.
I think you were very fortunate to have worked with so many people. I think
they were pretty terrific people, too.
Makes the job easier, doesn't it?
It sure does.
Mm-hmm. We realized that Mr. Leonard had to retire due to ill health. Can you tell us about that period?
Well, you're right, that he retired in December of 1978 because of ill health, and I became the temporary postmaster for 5 months. But on May the 30th of 1979, Alan Hunter became our new postmaster, and during this period I trained Clara Griffiths, Cam Freeburn, and Vivian Stewart. We also had a visiting trainee in the name of Larry Speece. Now, he worked at Neepawa. He was promoted to postmaster at Winnipeg Beach, and he came to us to be trained in the financial procedure of running a post office. We must have made a pretty good job because he's been promoted again to a bigger office at Shoal Lake, and I, for one, watch his career with great interest because I think he'll go far. In August of '84, Alan Hunter took a promotion to a larger office, and once again I became temporary postmaster. However, effective November the 5th of '84, I was officially named postmaster of Gladstone.
That must have been quite a change for you, Irene. How about telling us about your duties? Because it must have been quite different.
Well, it was a real thrill, I'll tell you. The duties were the same, and the pay was better. My supervisor was Ron Jasper, and he's his own postmaster at Portage, and Bob Willis at Minnedosa was the supervisory postmaster. Both men were very helpful and very kind. Some of the duties in the post office is counter service, mail processing, receiving, sorting, registering, and dispatching, making bank deposits, setting and recording mail, postage meter transactions, directing missent mail, repairing cash accounts, auditing tills, requisitioning postage, maintaining an accurate and filing system, auditing the vending machine. You know, that little machine that's just outside the post office door that's supposed to dispense stamps, but the machine that spends a lot of time with the sign out of order on it. And you're also recording and maintaining records of post office box rentals. Changing lock boxes when a person moves away is also a very important part of the job. In talking about box rents, it's kind of a sad thought for me because most of the cards for box rents are in the husband's names. And once a year you go through the rental cards, and you have to change the husband's name to the wife's names of the husbands who have died, and it sure makes you realize how many women have become widows during that year. It always bothered me, and I never got used to it.
Yes, I can see where it distressed you greatly, and especially a lot of them you would have known, because I'm sure that you become friends with the majority of people that come in, and you have a little chat when there's time, and I think that's nice too. Are there any other areas of the job then that caused you distress, Irene?
The closing of the rural route happened while I was postmaster, and this caused some problems with some of the patrons who were not happy with the closing. The staff and I could not do anything to be of real assistance to them. We could only conform to policy.
Did you have any unusual experiences you could share with us?
No, another part of the job that I found distressing was I was sent out on inspection of several of the smaller offices in the surrounding area. And I can truthfully say I did not enjoy this aspect of the job. I'm no inspector. It was just went against the grain to assume there was something wrong until you prove the figures were right. And as I went through the papers, it always gave me the feeling of snooping. I guess it really wasn't, but for me, it gave me that feeling. As for unusual experiences, I don't know. One morning we had medicine come from out of town medical clinic for a child. Only the child's name was on the parcel. There was no box number and no parent's name, and nobody on staff knew the child. We had 7 families with that surname, and I picked up the telephone and phoned every family if they had a child by that name. When we last located the family, the mother was ever so grateful because she had a child with a serious medical problem. When CB radios came in, we had a bit of a problem too when they came into the area. We had several letters come in with the radio call letters and of the radio operators and or their call names and nothing else. You know, no box number, no last name, no family name. So discreet inquiries usually got their letters to them. We once had a letter written in a very shaky handwriting, and no one on staff recognized the name on it. Thinking there was something strange about it, I inquired of a man in his late 70s if he knew this person. He says, "Oh, why sure, that's Mrs. So-and-so. That's her maiden name." Well, I put the letter in this elderly lady's box, and she never did know how we found out. Perhaps her friend had forgotten her married name. Who knows?
Did people ever expect more of you than your duties called for?
Well, sometimes in a small post office you're called upon to do a little extra because you know everyone and everyone's your friend. One day when I was on holidays, the local vet called me at home. He had a parcel card in the box, and it was after hours in the post office. Would I come and give him the parcel? He had a customer with a bull that had foot rot, and he needed a tranquilizer gun to handle him. And he was sure it was in that parcel. So I drove into town and I gave him the parcel. And sure enough, it was the gun that he was waiting for. So he told me who owned the bull. And the next time I saw the lady on the street, I asked her, how did it turn out? And she said, "Oh, the bull is just fine." So one day a lady phoned, and she was diabetic and she was expecting medicine, and would I drive in and give her the parcel. This was after hours again. These things always happen after hours. When this one phoned, I just phoned one of the staff, and she went and gave her the medicine, and it was her medicine. Like the card doesn't say so, but she knew what was coming, so all's well that ends well. We also had a doctor once phone us to wait for a lab sample that was urgent, and we held up the dispatch for him.
We've certainly had very interesting experiences, the type that most people would not have had anything to do with. It makes the job even more fascinating. You often hear people talking of poor working conditions. What about the local conditions in our own post office?
One time we needed an air conditioner very badly. The office was like an oven, and it took several years to get one. The department and Mr. Leonard didn't always agree on needs. But however, they finally agreed with him, or maybe they had extra money allocated, I don't know. But we finally got one, and it sure made work much more pleasant. Another time, the population was getting larger. There was more mailboxes had to be installed, and there wasn't enough room to install the amount of mailboxes they needed. So the building had to be remodeled, and there was carpenters and lumber and tools everywhere. And it was a very trying time, both for us and for our caretaker. There wasn't a dust-free chair in the place, so you couldn't sit down. You had to dust the desk off before you could put a piece of paper on it. And I even fell over a 2x4, flat in my face, trying to get someone's mail for them. It was oh well. There was also the time they decided to put in a new rubberized flooring, and it was supposed to be much easier on our feet. And it was much easier on our feet. But the old tile had to be heated, and in order to lift with torches, in order to lift it off. The smell of it made the boss sick, so he went home. But I remained on duty, and the customers were few and far between. I think everyone thought they could do their post office business another day. And another day I remember that was not so funny was the safe wouldn't come open. Now this caused a real problem. And I always carried a roll of stamps in my purse for my own personal use. So we sold them until we could get an expert to open the safe. Now sometimes it took forever to get the department to move, but this must have been considered an emergency because we had a man out there immediately. He fixed the safe and we were back in business.
Was there ever any talk of strike at Gladstone when, like other places where striking, we were never aware of it, you know, if there had been?
Well, we did not belong to the striking union, like we belonged to a different union, so therefore we had nothing to do with that, and we just carried on. If they brought us mail, we processed it. A lot of the paper companies and that, you know, farm papers and journals, and they brought the papers right to the office, and we put them in the boxes because we were not on strike. We had nothing to do with them at all.
That sounds good.
Yeah.
I realize the local post office isn't large, but were there ever groups wanting to tour the building?
Oh yes, we had at different times, grade 1 and grade 2 classes, tour the post office. Actually, about once a year we had little people come. Each child bought a stamp, and they mailed their letter, and then they watched us process it, cancel the stamps, and process their letter. The highlight of the visit for these little youngsters seemed to be the location of their own family mailbox. That was always a big thrill. And then we usually gave them a little booklet, or sometimes we had balloons or something. And we also had girl guides and grade 10 accounting class, but this was more involved with all aspects of postal work. And most of those were conducted after hours. I believe only once was it conducted during office hours. And once the staff went to the school to conduct it, but we didn't do much of that in office time.
I'm sure it'd be interesting.
Yeah, it was a little too involved for in the office.
I'm sure you received recognition over the years, Irene, and we'd sure like to hear about that.
Well, when I was in the service 25 years, Ron Jasper presented me with a 25-year plaque and pin. That was very nice. And I also received a perfect attendance pin. That was for perfect attendance for 1 year. And on January of this year, when I retired after 28 years of service, Mike Bonney, head of operations in Winnipeg, came out and presented me with a plaque signed by the Prime Minister of Canada and Michael Warren. And I was most impressed. I also received a very lovely letter from our MLA. So the staff held a come and go tea for me, which I enjoyed, and I'm ever so grateful to them. I got a chance to talk with everyone.
I'm sure that made your working years all worthwhile to, you know, feel that they did value what you had
Well, I think
you done?
Yes, I think so. I quite enjoyed it. I enjoyed my position while I was doing it. I enjoyed my staff, and I enjoyed the public. The people of Gladstone were very good to me, for which I am grateful. But it's now time to move on to other things. I'm glad to be retired and let younger people carry on the task. For make no mistake, it's a demanding and exacting position. But I have no regrets.
No, I'm sure you haven't. Thank you, Irene, for agreeing to be interviewed. And I hope it was both interesting and informative for our audience, as it certainly was for me. I didn't realize there was so much involved. Good night, everyone.
Thanks for joining us for tonight's edition of Community Camera. Watch GATV Channel 12 for information about our next interview. Good night.